Good retailing has always been experiential. Think of the early 20th century department stores. Boy, did they understand experience, right?
So it's almost like we have to work at two levels. We have to work at the level of finding the reasons why people come. People are coming for different reasons. And then also we have to work at the level of the reasons why people leave.
But we went there because the mall was the third space, right? The mall was the meeting place. So it wasn't just going to the mall because I had to purchase whatever it was, a book for school or a shirt for a dance. I went there, I wanted to see and be seen.
Hey neighbors, welcome to the Sidewalk Ballet presented by Big Creative Consulting. I'm Chip, and I'm really glad you're here, especially for this one, for a few reasons. First, this is a bit of a milestone for us. We're kicking off season 2, and if you're new to the show, welcome. I'd invite you to, at some point, to go back and explore some of the conversations from season 1. Not right now, you'll want to stay with us for this, but when you have time, we've talked to some incredible people across a wide range of topics. But at its core, this show is about cities and the people who shape them and how we live together in them, these strange, complex social laboratories. So this season, we're going to keep digging, keep exploring what and who makes cities work, and what does it actually mean when a city works, for who, and at what cost. So as we try to understand cities, I thought we would start this season off with one of the fundamentals. And that brings us to this episode. Humans have always engaged in exchange: labor, tools, food, ideas. For most of our history, that exchange was local, relational. It happened wherever it needed to happen. And then something shifted. The Neolithic Revolution changed not just what we exchanged, but how. Agriculture created surplus, which meant not everyone had to spend their day hunting or gathering, but people could specialize, make different things, offer different skills. And that made exchange more regular, more complex. It would be an overreach to say that this is why cities were invented, but it did create the conditions for something new, because now exchange needed a place. And in early cities like Uruk, that place began to take shape: the marketplace, a place where people could reliably find each other, where goods moved, where strangers interacted, and over time, something deeper formed. The marketplace depended on the city, and just as much, the city depended on the marketplace. Cities have evolved in countless ways since those early beginnings, but that relationship between place and the exchange of goods has remained remarkably constant. Today, we call that retail. And there may be nothing we point to more quickly or more confidently as a signal of a city's health than its retail. Our guests today think about this a lot, not only about what makes retail work, but how retail supports districts and cities.
My name is Mike Berne, MJB Consulting. We're a retail planning real estate consultancy founded in 2003, based in New York City and the San Francisco Bay Area. Work across the country, as well as Canada and the UK. And I do quite a bit of writing and speaking as well on these subjects. Glad to be here.
My name is Jaime Izurieta. I am based in Montclair, New Jersey. I am the founder of Storefront Mastery, which is a creative agency that works with business improvement districts and main streets to create great street-level experiences, working with storefront owners, harnessing whatever they do as a contribution to the streetscape to create the street-level experiences.
To have this conversation, we pulled in one of our good friends and collaborators at Sidewalk Ballet. Enjoy.
I am Josh Yeager. I am the co-founder of Bright Brothers Strategy Group. We are a strategic consultancy in Philadelphia and Phoenix, working at the intersection of placemaking, marketing and communications, and economic development. And I'm thrilled to have both of you on the show today. So, and I were talking about this, and we thought it would be great to bring you guys on and have a conversation about retail. Obviously, there's so much going on in the world of retail and different dynamics and pressures affecting things, but it's one consistent that comes up in all of our businesses with working with downtowns and districts and cities directly. Retail has a massive impact. So, but there's change going on and change. So we wanted to bring you guys in because you both have different perspectives and probably lend some really interesting insights to the conversation. One of the things that we were talking about is that retail keeps getting described as if either it's dying or it's transforming into experience or experiential retail. But districts still rely on retail to do something very fundamental. So the real question is like, why does retail still matter for local communities to thrive? And what might we be misunderstanding about that?
I have an idea after working with different districts that are what I say in different tiers, then you realize that for some, retail is dead, but only boring retail. Retail that is not boring, retail that is experiential, retail that is enticing a different public at a different level is very much alive. And then there's other towns that have not yet reached that level of, I guess, experiential ready. And so for them, maybe it's still there's a need still for conventional retail. The thing is that retail has been almost completely replaced by online shopping, convenient online shopping. So I do not need to go to a store to buy toilet paper. I just click on my phone, toilet paper arrives at my doorstep 2 hours later. So for some, yes, there's still a need to still rely on that. But then for the ones that are already in a higher level, I guess for them the way out is experiential.
Yeah, I mean, Josh, I'm glad you asked the question because I know you were in Washington, D.C. for last year's IDA conference, right? The opening reception was at the National Building Museum, and they had put together this really extensive exhibit about downtowns in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. And it was very comprehensive with one notable exception. There was a lot about converting office space. There was a lot about placemaking. There was a lot about everything except retail. There was barely anything about retail, which not only was a little bit insulting for those of us who live and breathe it every day, and not altogether surprising, because I think retail is easily the most complex and counterintuitive of the different property types. And so quite intimidating to a lot of people, but also because, let's face it, it's the one use that we all can see and assess for ourselves. We do not know what's going on upstairs. For all we know, all those office suites are empty, or all those residential units are just second homes. And we don't know. We have no clue. And most of us have no way of finding out unless we're in the industry, right? But we do see the retail or lack thereof, right? And as a result, we do use retail knowingly or subconsciously as a way of understanding a place. And so it plays a disproportionate role in shaping impressions and perceptions, and ultimately in driving investment decisions in ways that I don't think people always even consciously realize. I think it's the one use which, we can all see and assess. And for that reason and that reason alone, it's fundamental.
Everyone keeps talking about experiential retail. And what we're trying to do with Bright Brothers a lot of times is take things that big cities and big districts that have budgets and economic development departments, and how can we translate those things to smaller districts? What are smaller, simple ways that you think that at the storefront level or at the experience level, retailers should be doing or districts could be doing to offer a path for the ratepayers?
Everything is going to be an experience regardless. So when you go to any place, when you go to the most expensive place in Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, or when you go to the most humble place that's been there for 30 years resisting everything in Cairo, Illinois, there is an experience. And it is in the purview and within reach of whoever is in charge of that shop to provide an amazing experience to the people who visit. So think of a incredibly humble cigar shop that has not invested a dime in anything in the last 25 years coming apart. As soon as you enter, you smell the cigar. As soon as you enter, you get greeted by someone, of course, wearing a guayabera with a straw hat and, of course, smoking, and starts to tell you about the new cigars that he got with the filler and the cap, which is Connecticut cap from Ecuador, and starts to bring all these stories and brings the story from someone in Ecuador who is picking these tobacco leaves and packaging them, so that the 15 minutes or 20 minutes that we are there, we are immersed in this world of cigars, and you are completely immersed and you are completely taken by these stories that this person is telling, and by the environment and by the smell and by everything that's around you, the music, he offers you coffee, whatever, and then you leave and you have been transformed. Your perception of cigars has changed. Your perception of the entire street, the entire town might have changed just because you had this very meaningful interaction with someone whose investment was the shirt, the hat, and a stogie.
Yeah. Mike, you have good examples of maybe how smaller individual ratepayers or businesses can take lessons around experiential back for their small businesses?
What I will say is I've long had trouble understanding exactly what is meant by experiential. And Jaime, you're completely right to say everything is an experience. We're sentient beings. We have experiences, and experiential has always felt to me a little bit like other buzzwords we use that aren't very well defined, like community. What does it even mean? Because it seems I mean, to me, good retailing has always been experiential. Think of the early 20th century department stores. Boy, did they understand experience, right? Whereas the ones today, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them don't really seem to think about that at all. But it also seems to posit kind of a past at some point when retail was strictly transactional, and in a way unthinking. And I don't really know if that ever existed. I know there's just this kind of trope, I don't know, of, Cher Horowitz from Clueless. She just goes to, West Side Pavilion or whatever mall and just shops unthinkingly. And I don't know if it's kind of experientials meant as a contrast to that somehow like we used to be really transactional, and now suddenly, as consumers, we prefer experiential. I don't know if shopping ever was that. In fact, shopping has always been an experience, and it's the experience of going shopping. I think, yes, theoretically, we can get almost anything online, but just because theoretically we can do that doesn't mean we will. Same goes for anything that you could actually do much more easily, conveniently, and perhaps even enjoyably in your own home. And yet we keep going to physical stores. We keep going to movie theaters. This is not just about what we can do, but what we actually will do. And I think that's more about human psychology.
But you got me thinking about something here too, like filling up a car with gasoline. I mean, technically that's retail as well. And I was thinking, have I had positive experiences? Have I had negative experiences? Sure. I can think of when I first moved to Arizona, I went to a QT, which is big. There was plenty of place to get gas. I could pull in. There was plenty of parking. That entire experience was very different from tanking up that I had experienced on the East Coast, where you pull into a little corner thing and you're waiting for the guy in front of you to pull out so that you can get in. But there are different ways that, I mean, even something as mundane, that's still a retail exchange. There's still a transaction, but I will drive out of my way to go to a gas station that I want to go to versus one that looks sketchy or weird or dirty or
Well, actually, Josh, you're hitting the nail on the head about another trend, which has definitely been gaining ground over the last few decades, which is that there used to be this distinction between convenience and comparison goods in retail, and conveniences were those like kind of errands or essentials, and they were called conveniences in part because every purveyor of whether it's gas or prescription drugs or groceries or dry cleaning was assumed to be interchangeable. So why would you at all inconvenience yourself. You're just going to go to the nearest drugstore or the nearest grocery store. And that's because up until like the 90s, most of them were interchangeable. And then we started getting grocery stores like Whole Foods and Trader Joe's. Not then, I mean, those already existed, but they started to really spread across the United States. And then we started getting, all manner of barbershops, men's grooming salons, which, serve you a cocktail or a beer and you can watch, and all these things that used to be interchangeable conveniences, commodities, they themselves became something more than that, such that you would drive past your Safeway or your Kroger to get to a Whole Foods. You would drive past your Supercuts to get to your, whatever, men's grooming salon. They have a very different presence on the street, a much more appealing one, right? You go in there and actually the merchandise, such as it is, isn't all that different, but the space is laid out in a more, somehow more welcoming way. And the graphics and the fonts and, the packaging is so much more coherent. And that appeals to something in our psychologies.
I think you're hitting the nail in the head in one thing, which is super important. The experience was there the whole time. People chose to go to the mall because of the experience the whole time. This is something that we really need to address when we start talking about experiences, because otherwise it's just a buzzword, like you said. So essentially, now what happens is that the trip is the important part, and whatever you buy is just a souvenir. So when we see it like that, the service that I am actually providing is the time that you're spending with me. How awesome, how amazing, how unforgettable, how incredible that time is. That is the product. So people are willing to pay more for the goods because they remind them of the time they had in a place. So the product is time more than the actual good. And that's one thing. And the other thing where this connects is that as we progress in economic complexity, things that we see as novelties eventually become commodities. I was just seeing a paper the other day about someone who decided to measure why coffee shops all look the same. And they created this huge matrix of the elements of coffee shops.
That was Conrad's work, right? Conrad Kickert.
Conrad Kickert, yeah. So basically, they sent a poll, and people said, "Does your coffee shop have exposed brick? Does your coffee shop have reclaimed woods? Does your barista have tattoos or a beard or piercings?" And turns out that every coffee shop you go in Philadelphia, in Phoenix, in Montclair, they're going to be the same. They look exactly the same. So what's happened, which is super interesting, what's happened is that the coffee shop now has become the commodity. So I can get the same coffee because I am looking for the Guatemalan beans. So I go and I get the same coffee because the baristas are all prepared in the same style of whatever coffee making. And so I can get the same coffee in Phoenix, in Santa Cruz, and in Montclair. What is the next tier? What is the next level? This is where the experience comes. What are they guiding me to? Where are they taking me? How are they transforming my life with the interaction that I have with them? This is a fascinating study by Joe Pine and Jim Gilmore. They have a book called The Experience Economy. And this is what they say. As we progress in economic complexity, we innovate and we introduce new things. So the trade becomes service. Service becomes the just industry. Eventually, it becomes the experience, and then it becomes the transformation. And as we are progressing, the innovations, when they become widespread, they become themselves the commodities. So those go down in value. Now, what's the next level? Next level right now for us is the experience. People are paying for time, and whatever they buy is just a souvenir of that time.
That's beautifully stated, Jaime. I think you're completely right. I don't think it's that experience has become something new. Experience has always been there. It's just the nature, the kinds of experiences we want have changed. I am a product of the 80s. And I grew up in, suburban New York in the 80s. And in the 80s, you went to the mall, and that was an experience that we loved. It might have been, from our snarky 2026 vantage point, kind of tacky, kind of cheesy, kind of generic, but it
But it
was.
was amazing.
But it was amazing, and we went though, and I think this is another piece of this discussion is, but we went there because the mall was the third space, right? The mall was the meeting place. So it wasn't just going to the mall because I had to purchase whatever it was, a book for school or a shirt for a dance. I went there. I wanted to see and be seen by the right people, right? So,
And incidentally, you did shopping.
right, that was just a sidebar.
Incidentally, yes.
We were
Yes.
going there to socialize. It was the socialization aspect that I think drew us in. Which also this goes back to something that you and I were talking about that really blew my mind when I read it. I wanted to mention both of you publish phenomenal insights, very pointed opinions on things. You both, I think, are really thought leaders and luminaries on this topic. Mike, I see you publish quite a bit on LinkedIn. You use that kind of a blogging platform in some ways. So I would encourage everyone to go follow Mike on LinkedIn and go read his stuff. Jaime, you publish on Substack, right?
I do post on LinkedIn occasionally, but yeah, Substack
Yeah.
most.
And this was coming back to one of your Substack posts. It was about we've got the metrics wrong, we've got the KPIs wrong. And you made a statement that I thought, whoa, that is bold. And this is also something I wanted to explore on this. We were talking about it's not so much about floor plates or dollars per square foot. That's an old metric. And that the performance indicators that we should be looking at is dwell time. And you were just talking about how as dwell time increases, then the dollars increase. But let's talk about that.
So essentially, what I'm thinking is, again, as we move up this progression of economic complexity, what we are offering is time well spent. And these are not my words; these are Joe Pines and Jim Gilmore's. Time well spent. It's a beautiful way of putting this. When we offer time, then we need people to spend time with us. And when they are satisfied, when they feel like the time they're spending with us is unforgettable, it's wonderful, it's amazing, it's really a great time, then they will spend. Then whatever I offer them as a souvenir of their time, of the time they're spending with me, this is why people go to Disney World and spend $20 in a glass of Coke, because they're having such an amazing time, and whatever much Disney charges for food, they will just gladly pay, because they're not paying for food. They're paying for their time in the Magic Kingdom. So this is the idea behind, let's not look at how much your normie metrics are looking at. Let's look at how long I can keep you by my side so that my business model can have interactions with you and offer you different things that you may or may not buy. If you don't buy today and I offer you a spectacular time, you're 100% going to come back and you may buy the second time. So I am trying to get even not just longer stays, a single stay, but more stays, cultivating relationships with people that go in time, that have a lower time preference. So if you don't buy from me today, you might buy from me later. So that's the reasoning behind changing the metrics from the regular metrics that we have to dwell time. How much of your attention do I have?
But do you think that there are like traditional economic development authorities that are looking at things that way? Because I think that they're probably very focused on the wrong metrics still.
I don't think they are. I think this is still incredibly new. Although the original paper on this was published in '98, I think, or '99. I know that companies hire the people who are experts in changing the mindset from the transactional to the experiential, thinking of experiential as the souvenir of the time people spend with us. Look at any big company and they are doing it. I can think of a really, really good one, which is Indigo, the bookseller. It's a Canadian company that sells books, but it's an entire experiential time that you go. You can spend the entire day there, and they have areas for cooking, and they have areas for wellness, and they have areas for just everything. And so what they're doing is they're cultivating a different time, a different type of relationship with their customers, which is about time.
This is interesting. I cut my teeth on retail. I worked at this amazing bookseller called Brentanos, and I don't know that they exist anymore, but the whole thing was elevated and exactly what we were talking about. Every morning when we set up the store, we put up a coffee urn and hot water and tea. There was an entire station. There were benches, park benches inside this retail store. So the whole thing felt like an experience. You could pick up a book and sit there and read it all day. But it was vastly different from my experience working at a B. Dalton's, which was much more just a straightforward bookseller.
And, the retailer that comes to mind, that has really perfected this, and it's a very high-end retailer, RH, former Restoration Hardware, which only incidentally sells home furnishings, but has, restaurant, art gallery. Ralph Lauren also, a number of their stores now have these Ralph's coffee houses. The best one maybe is the one on on Magnificent Mile on North Michigan Avenue, Chicago. The front is Ralph's Cafe. You don't even necessarily notice, at least immediately, that it's a Ralph Lauren store. And so he leads with the cafe. But it's kind of like what Jaime was saying, which we could maybe get back to later. This whole process that everything goes through from hip to trendy to mass. And it's not going to be long, and it might already be here, where the whole notion of stores offering in-store cafes is becoming commodified. But I think, to your larger point about dwell time, look, I went to malls in the 80s. Don't really go to them now. And obviously, we know very few of them are being built. A lot more are closing. But malls, at least as they were conceptualized, offer us so many lessons about how we should think about downtowns. And I know for some people that's like, ugh, a mall. But really, they've been understanding dwell time since the beginning. In fact, if you look at almost every single innovation at the mall, it was driven by the desire to increase dwell time. When they added food courts, when they added movie theaters, those were all in part to keep you there for longer. What I think, though, districts, and I think, you and Jaime are right. I think it's only dawning on districts. They too should be thinking about dwell time. What we miss is the less sexy aspects of that. Like, at the least sexy, bathrooms, right? Like, what one of the reasons we leave places? Because we have to go to the bathroom and we don't want to go into this disgusting public restroom, and it's just something America cannot get right. And I was working I don't know if you two are familiar with, in the fashion district in LA, there's this famous alley called Santee Alley. Talk about an experience, right? That is one hell of an experience for shopping. And yet the bathrooms, you can't find them. When you do find them, you decide, I don't really want to go in here. You have to pay. And Santee Alley, as with all of our downtowns, multiple property owners, you have to get everyone to agree to help with this endeavor to create and manage public bathrooms, right? You can't get them to agree on what we all know is a critical part of keeping people there. you know, or phone charging stations, or the really unsexy reasons why we leave places, or one of the best examples, and then I'll shut up, is malls that understand that if you're going to give, and again, to be gendered about it, if you're going to give women free reign to shop for clothing, you better provide the men with something to do too. So some malls actually have created these kind of man cave type environments where on a Sunday afternoon, the guys can sit there and watch NFL, Well, and again, I don't want to be gendered. Lots of guys shop and lots of women watch sports. Is that, you are thinking about all the reasons why people leave places, and you're trying to provide amenities and services that they can instead take care of on site so that they stay there and they
Right.
dwell and they spend.
So it's almost like we have to work at two levels. We have to work at the level of finding the reasons why people come. People are not coming to buy a T-shirt or buy a roll of toilet paper. People are coming for different reasons. And then also we have to work at the level of the reasons why people leave.
All right. You guys, I love being in the room with two smarter people and listening to you guys go. Can you guys help me with something? I had a client ask me this. It was actually a board member who was talking about they've built all kinds of new housing. So housing is not necessarily the issue for this district, but those folks are commuting and or many of them working from home, like a lot of us do. But they were saying we cannot get these folks to come downstairs and spend money with us. We can't get them out of their apartment to come down for the bars and restaurants and shops that we do have right here. Like, would either of you have a recommendation for them based on just this scenario?
My recommendation is looking at it in a different light. So number one, people will patronize sexy businesses. This is a rule of the market and the universe. If there is a business that is sexy, that offers a good product, that where sexy people go, and if I go, I will be seen and I will see, this is a business that I will patronize. And that's the rule. Most of the businesses that we have in these sort of developments are essentially businesses that are feeding the residential or the office components of real estate projects. Those businesses are making the entire lifestyle and atmosphere of the project sellable. So sometimes those businesses need to be subsidized by the property owners. Sometimes those businesses need to be extremely and carefully curated by the property owners to bring exactly the type of business that they want, that will attract exactly the type of tenant that they want upstairs. How those businesses do is, I guess, secondary. Those businesses are sometimes seen as props, which is not great. I mean, this is a great opportunity for great businesses to really thrive. But the end finality of these businesses is to be the drivers of the lifestyle for the upper floors. How we see them will determine if we have longer functioning businesses, if we can have longer leases with them that they actually take advantage of and create something amazing. Are they working with those businesses to create street level experiences even for the people who are not even living there or shopping in those businesses? So looking at these as the drivers of a larger business model is a good way. Looking at these as the opportunities to drive a larger business model is also a good thing. And looking at the business model itself to see how we are seeing these ground floor or these nearby commercial districts.
Well, it's interesting because I think part of this is that we, as an industry, sold people on a bill of goods. That isn't really true. So, if because I would agree, Josh, that if you look a lot at I've been working in more and more downtowns over the last 5 years who have gotten all of this new housing. And they ask me the question, where are they? We don't see them spending here. And to me, it's not necessarily that they're not spending. It's that we have oversold really how much of a contribution they're making. If you're in a downtown and you add 500 units of new housing, let's say you're not in a big city, you're in kind of a healthy suburban downtown, right? And you've added 500 units of housing. That feels like a lot of housing. But in the grand scheme of things, in terms of the amount of retail demand you need to support that downtown's footprint. It's a drop in the bucket, right? And so this notion that you can build even like a lifestyle center and add 100 units on site and that somehow that's going to have a meaningful impact on retail spending, it's just a fallacy. So we're taking the wrong lessons from this, that somehow these people aren't spending money. These 100 units might be spending money. It's just that was never what you should have relied on to begin with. And it gets back to my larger point, which is that ultimately most of our downtowns and most of our larger concentrations of retail generally, whether in a downtown or a lifestyle center, they need to draw from beyond their own property line. They need to pull from much further afield. They need to be destinations. And that is not something which our industry eagerly embraces, right? Because there's another fallacy that somehow if you give what the locals want, then the visitors will follow. That's not necessarily true. I was working in Hollywood. And a lot of stakeholders were telling me, well, we got to focus Hollywood more on what the locals want, and then the tourists will follow. Nonsense. A lot of the people who are visiting Hollywood are coming from small towns where the presence of a Sephora is like a major event. Now, if you live in Los Angeles, there's a Sephora probably in every neighborhood. Yeah, I remember I was once on a bus in Manhattan, and I was asking these tourists who were sitting across from me, like, what's been your most exciting part of your trip? And I thought they'd say, I don't know, Statue of Liberty, Rockefeller Center, Times Square. The 17-year-old teenage daughter said, "Oh, I went to my first Abercrombie& and Fitch. It was like, heaven." And I'm like, "No, there is a tension between what locals want and what visitors want, and the visitors are what will ultimately drive your retail, to a much greater extent than that 100-unit apartment complex." So I think there's something that's considered a little tawdry about that, but, math is math.
It's true. It's true.
This is validating for me to hear as well. We dropped a trends report this week about pivoting on who you're targeting.
And can I just interrupt, Josh, to give you and David a plug? You guys have one of the best newsletters in the industry, the Bright Brothers Bulletin. And so anyone who's into this, I just wanted to plug that because
No, thank
great
you.
source.
I appreciate it. It is a labor of love, and but it's also good for us to keep us focused and constantly on top of what makes sense for our readership. Chip, this has been, machinating in my brain. I've been chewing on this for months and months and months. I mentioned it when I was on Sidewalk Ballet back in the new year. And now we are less than 100 days out from FIFA America 250. I think that there are a lot of folks who are going to be really unhappy with the hangover. Anyway, we dropped this trends report. It's thinking like a destination marketer. And is I literally put in the trends report, pretend you don't work at the bid for a day, pretend you work at the CVB. How does that re-lens how you're seeing the district? How does that re-lens everything for you? For years, I've been talking about this with both tourism and CVB partners and bid partners, and they seem to think that they do very different things. And from my perspective, you're both doing the
It's
same
the
thing.
same thing.
You have a different geographic purview and footprint, but you are both organizations that need to be working in tandem with one another. But I understand why many don't, but the most successful districts that I have seen are those where the downtown district is in partnership with the CVB or the chamber and the city. When you can lock down those four and move together in the same direction, that's where it works. But as far as that trends report goes, yeah, I want every bid practitioner to think of themselves as a destination marketer because I think that is what it requires to get folks there. And the big chunk of that, exactly what you were saying, Mike, a Sephora on the corner may not be a big thing to you because you're here and you live here and you see it every day. But for somebody who has to drive 2 or 3 hours to get to a Sephora on the regular, that is a destination driver for them.
The other thing I was gonna add about that is, we kind of lost a mall in downtown San Francisco in the last 5 years in Union Square. which was one of the most successful malls in the country. It pretty much no longer exists now. And there's a lot of talk about what should take its place. And, I've gotten into a little bit of trouble because I've made the argument that, like, no, this should not just be about let's build a residential tower and let's make this a neighborhood. Union Square has always been almost exclusively a tourist and shopping destination. You don't change that overnight. And frankly, if you tenant it like a neighborhood, no one is crossing an ocean to go to a boutique fitness studio and a men's grooming salon and another Chipotle. They're just not. That is not the kind of retail that fits. And yet in our industry, there's such a movement to to shift downtowns into neighborhoods. And that should happen, but it can't be all they are.
We'll be right back with more from Jaime, Mike, and Josh.
Josh, you said something super interesting, which is that every downtown bid DMO manager, they have to think of themselves as a destination marketer.
Mm-hmm.
I think, especially in times like these, where you're obligated to look at the opportunities and the alternatives for pivoting, because for a number of reasons, there is uncertainty. There is uncertainty. I mean, wherever you are, whatever your thoughts, whatever your philosophy, whatever your walk of life, what we see in the near and mid future is uncertainty. So it's very important that we are aware that there will be some pivoting needed, and having the district managers kind of take a look at their role and be able to understand how that role can change is important. Also, it's very important that the retail, that the food and beverage, that everyone who has a commercial space in a downtown also is ready to pivot. So I try to tell them that first they have to look at themselves as hospitality businesses above everything else. If that little girl goes and their main thing is going to a Sephora, the people who greet her in Sephora have the responsibility of making that trip to Hollywood the best thing that's happened to that person's life. It's their responsibility. The same responsibility that the owner of the cigar shop I was referencing before, the same responsibility of whoever is working, the host or hostess in a Fifth Avenue Ferragamo shop.
Right.
They have the responsibility to be the hosts, to provide the first smile, to provide the first open arms, to provide the first great relationship and interaction that people have with that. So they need to be first and foremost hospitality businesses, and then whatever business they are, because they are being the face of the downtown.
I think what comes to mind now is what the relatively new CEO is trying to do with Starbucks, which is very much about hospitality, which the customer clearly started to feel had basically left the building. And it's talk about trying to do something like that at scale. It's at Starbucks, one of the biggest business we've got.
It's a fabulous example too. So Starbucks redefined coffee.
Yeah.
Starbucks redefined the relationship of people with coffee, redefined the relationship of people with the coffee house. And then Starbucks became a commodity. There's a Starbucks everywhere. And sadly to say, the quality of Starbucks drinks is not good. And then they open the Starbucks Reserve. If you step into any of these Starbucks Reserves coffee houses, I don't even know the exact name. Starbucks Reserve, yes.
Starbucks Roastery Reserve.
Roastery Reserve, yeah.
Yeah.
It's all about the experience. It's all about how you feel when you are there, the texture of the seating and the sound of the baristas and the music and the clinking of the cups and the people and the lights and everything. They have redefined the brand as it got commoditized to introduce the innovation at a higher tier. I think that is an amazing lesson that many brands will have to learn eventually, because as they get commoditized, they will need to do this. So I think Starbucks is, for so many reasons, is a fantastic example.
I find Starbucks fascinating to watch, and I watch them too. And this pivot and flip-flopping and flip-flopping. So the reserve experience, which I've not experienced, but is that an effort to, are they one, just trying to appeal to a more affluent consumer base? Two, is it an incubator or pilot to understand maybe we're going to learn lessons here and then those will trickle down to their regular stores? And then I know both of you have tracked this, and Mike, I'm sure you've talked about it or I've read about it, the whole in-store experience from over the last 5 years, it's gone from this to this to this. And they made big trends in trying to localize their places, make it that third space again, be a community. Then they were, no, we're getting rid of bathrooms and we're kicking people out. And then they don't want people. Now they want people there again. It's like, what does all of that mean? What does that mean about the evolution of, like you said, it's now a commodity. So do we want them to, are they increasing dwell time by making their stores localized? Does it
I
matter?
will make a parenthesis before, and I will remind you, I will ask you, do you remember how much the original cell phones cost? They were bricks. They were bricks this big, and they cost $3,500. And right now, you can go and you can get a cell phone at a top technology, like state of the art cell phone for $150. I think that is the progression as they introduce these reserve roasteries. They will be the initial market will be a more affluent market because they are innovations, because they have to charge a premium, because they are experimenting with different things. But then as time moves on, then the reserve roastery will be something that's more part of the culture. They stop charging for the novelty as with the big cell phones, and now they're charging for the function, which is the $150 cell phone. So it inevitably starts as a service only for affluent people, but then eventually moves on and service is offered to everyone.
And then, right, and they're stratifying. They're offering though for multiple different socioeconomic groups, right? But ultimately, the long tail should serve them better. Of I've got, even if I only capture 10% of an affluent market, that I'm going to get numbers of things, and then I've got my main core, and then I've got my lower tier that the majority of people go to. Incrementally, they're still making more money by offering these different levels of experience.
Yeah, and it's what you're really talking about is kind of a halo effect sort of approach. I think that, what I was referring to, I wasn't even thinking about the reserve roastery, which I very much associate with Howard Schultz, really the one who's responsible for Starbucks becoming what it did. But the current CEO now, Brian Niccol, he turned around Taco Bell. Long time, it wasn't that long ago. Taco Bell wasn't the dominant force it's become today. And then he rescued or got credit for rescuing Chipotle from its E. coli crisis. Do you remember that? Um, and then he came to Starbucks, and he's someone who has so much credibility in the industry because of those successes. He's being given a little bit of time from investors to try some things to kind of return Starbucks to what it originally aspired to be, which was this third place. So if you go to Starbucks today, and again, this is a work in progress, but they are, they are now retraining baristas to say hello and smile to you within a certain amount of time. They are writing little things on your cups again, right? Get a ceramic mug, to drink your coffee in. Whether they can do this at scale and whether they can do it quickly enough to keep investors from jumping ship and selling their stock is an open question, but it is an attempt to return to hospitality, which I think Starbucks got away from in its zest to take advantage of the off-premises market and deliver, and pick up and drive through and all that.
I'm loving this combo with you both. There's one last thing I would really like to pick both of your brains about while I have you both here. And this is something else that I've been noodling on a lot as well, is because we're seeing that younger generations are not drinking like older generations were. And it pains me because I think I've had some of the best experiences of my life bonding drinks with friends, with coworkers. I mean, going out with coworkers, even if it's just to blow off steam or bitch about this happened or that person did whatever, it's not happening anymore. to the level that it was. Here's the other side of it. So less alcohol consumption with younger cohorts. However, and this is coming back to that board member asking how we get folks down here, and I'm guilty of this too. I don't have to go out after work anymore. My younger cohorts don't want to go get drinks. I'm working from home remotely in joggers, and I don't want to have to put on tight, restrictive pants to go out. And on top of this, everything is downloadable, streamable, frictionless for me. Whereas maybe in the past, I would have gone and had drinks with coworkers after work. Now I just want to get home, get my pants off, eat this gummy, and order DoorDash. How much of that do you think is playing it? Like, how much more sedentary? And I don't know if this is, it's partially post-pandemic, because a lot of people were forced to be and stay at home then. So I think a lot of those interactions and behaviors broke down. But frictionless commerce and whatnot would have been taking place anymore. How much is weed legalization playing into sedentary generation? Because if I'm stoned, I'm not going to go out shopping or to a bar. What do you guys think that is there a cohesive thread here?
There is definitely a very big segment of the population that is not drinking anymore. That is not going out after the office, that is not doing happy hours, that is not doing many of those things. However, there are segments of the population that are still doing these things. And there are businesses that are catering to those segments of the population, and those businesses are doing well. What I'm thinking is that the real crux of the matter right now is that business owners are being obligated to rethink their audiences. They're being obligated to rethink how they relate to those audiences and what they need to do to change to be able to communicate and to resonate better with maybe different audiences. I don't think that the trends are just single trend downward, but there's many trends. And the way that business owners start to look at these trends and start to pivot and start to adapt to these trends, those are the ones that will be better positioned to remain after these trends play out, because the trends are there. We cannot deny that people are not drinking as much as they were, and we cannot deny that there's many distilleries and many wineries and many breweries that are going to close because people are drinking less. But the ones that remain, they will probably be stronger. The ones that remain will be catering in a better way, in a more significant way, to the public that they find, when they find it, that is still willing to patronize those kinds of businesses.
But I mean, that's always been true in business. It's the companies that that are forward looking, are listening to their customers, are paying attention and able and to adapt and evolve.
I mean, I think, I mean, there's a whole host of possible explanations for it. I mean, pot might have something to do with it. I think, the fact that this is a generation where some of the most important years of their lives in terms of socializing were spent in lockdown. And to what extent that resulted in kind of the habits that we develop, the socializing habits we developed kind of being deviated. And so they didn't get into that kind of lane of, okay, I socialize with my friends partly by going to drink, right? But I also, there's one other theory that I have, which is, you know, we went from millennials who drank a lot. I mean, drank a lot even compared to Gen X. I mean, they just drank a lot, right? So some of this is then we're kind of coming back down from that. But, I do wonder what would have happened with millennial drinking habits if the whole craft beer phenomenon hadn't kind of fueled alcohol consumption for another 2 decades, right? Because what might have happened was you got to a point where, American mass market beer was so commodified and so uninspiring. And then there needed to be, as you've been discussing, Jaime, there needed to be a shift, and there was a shift towards craft beer, right? And then maybe that's gotten to its ceiling, and it's a pretty high ceiling. I mean, to call it a niche anymore, I mean, when you got 13, 15% of the market, you know, but maybe that's hit a ceiling, and maybe it's the alcohol industry's need to really get creative and say, okay, what is next? right? Because mass market beer kind of hit its ceiling. Then craft maybe kept us going for a couple more decades with these millennials. And now there's just nothing all that interesting out there to take its place for this newer Gen Z that, for a variety of reasons, is not naturally gravitating to the alcohol driven lifestyle, and look, businesses have to pivot, right? And find new reasons for being, and maybe that's where we are right now. And I mean, how many IPAs can how many craft IPAs can you drink, really?
Me, none. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do not like IPAs. I think they taste like if I took a dirty penny and dropped it in a lager. But what I heard, there were a couple of things here. There's no one, Mike, you just mentioned this. The number of times I now see the truism that the pendulum always swings, it is true. And you see generational shifts back and forth in response to one another and then reinvented entirely based on what their current cultural context is. Number two, this also underscores why the three of us are all in business, is that there are no cookie cutter solutions. So if something worked in Denver, doesn't mean that you have the same residential mix, regional mix, societal mix, economic mix. Each one of these districts has to approach it based on their own situation. And while I love IDA, and I think that they do a phenomenal job of bringing people together, sharing of best practices, it's not like you can go to the West Coast Urban District Forum or the annual and say, okay, they did that, and then not adapt it for how you're going to deploy it locally.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We have, and I say this all the time in pitch decks and to potential clients, and I don't know that it resonates, but there are no cookie cutter solutions. We have processes, we have ways that we work with you, but I still need to dig into and understand your community, your politics. I need to understand what your populace is thinking. And that's what I think, even though, and this is another whole combo for another podcast, AI, it's great. It's a phenomenal tool. It helps in so many ways, but this does not mean that downtown Baltimore can take what downtown Santa Fe did, punch it into AI and localize it. You still need those critical thinking skills and experience that we all have in the room, whether the great folks who work with this industry and move it forward. We all understand everything has to be localized and it has to be customized for you guys.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Thank you both for coming on the show. Thanks to Chip and Big Creative Consulting for having us. Jaime Izurieta, your storefront mastery, and you have absolute mastery over storefront experiences. And Michael Berne, retail futurist, you constantly inspire me. And I love the conversation. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can I ask you guys one more question just to pause it on before we go? Can you just tell me why retail will be important moving in this next chapter as everything's changed? Just really succinctly why you feel like retail is such an important component of our cities.
I'm going to say that wherever we are, our recollection, our memories, the moments that we spend are defined by something. When we are in a walk in the mountains, it's defined by the fresh air and the mountains and the view. And when we are in a city, it's very rarely defined when there is nothing that we can personally relate to. So if we're just walking in a residential neighborhood, it may be beautiful. We may have a fantastic impression of the place. But what's really going to make us remember the place is going to be our interaction with something commercial. We had a cup of coffee. We said hi to the newspaper man, whatever, for as small as it may be, that is going to define our recollection and our memory. So this is why it will, maybe retail itself, no, but spaces, ground floor spaces that are open to the public, that offer a meaningful interaction with whoever is tending to them, those are still going to be important.
I think a lot of the language surrounding the, kind of presumed inevitability of an online world forgets this. We like doing this stuff. Now, lots of us like shopping. Most of us like eating out. Most of us caffeinate. A lot of people still drink. We like doing this stuff. It's the sort of world we want to live in, right? We don't want to live in a world where we order everything from our couch and it comes to our doorstep. That is, don't get me wrong. That convenience is not nothing. But in the end, this is how we want to show up in our life, right? And I think you never get enough away from that. Look, we had a pandemic where we had a once in a century experience, right? Still didn't kill retail. And that should tell us something, because if ever there was a moment when retail was going to die, or physical retail was going to die, that was it. And it just didn't happen. Yeah, and it came back stronger. So, I think that should be a lesson in this, in this ongoing debate about where retail's headed.
Sidewalk Ballet is a production of Big Creative Consulting, strengthening community through culture and place. Learn more at bigcreativeconsulting.com. Additional support comes from This Must Be the Place, a bi-monthly newsletter connecting placemaking professionals to opportunities. Learn more at thismustbe.org. Links to find our guests as well as other resources mentioned in today's episode are linked in the show notes and as always at sidewalkballet.com. Our theme music was composed by the Peacoat Project, engineering and editing by Ryan Musanti. At the end of the last episode, I listed a number of people who were instrumental in making the first season of the Sidewalk Ballet possible. There was one person who I didn't include on that list, and the reason is, I've decided, is that I wanted to wait until this episode to not only say thank you to my amazing wife, Abra, but also happy birthday. I love you, and you know nothing I do means anything without you. If this conversation resonated, please share it with someone who's doing the work of keeping their community whole. I'm Chip. Thanks for joining us on this block of the Sidewalk Ballet. I'll see you downtown.